Hello and welcome back to The Note. We had what you might almost call a political earthquake over the weekend. The markets had long been braced for the results of the European Parliament elections, and indeed they delivered victories for Eurosceptic parties of various stripes all across the continent. You would have thought this had thrown a spanner into the works of European integration, but the result in the markets was perhaps not quite what you would have expected. Indeed, the German DAX set a new record when markets reopened on Monday. What does this imply for the chances of overcoming the crisis? What does this mean for the European Central Bank as it tries to run European monetary policy? With me now to discuss this is our capital markets editor, Ralph Atkins. Ralph, thanks.
Hello.
Thanks for joining as a guest once more. Let's start by taking a look at German Bund yields compared there to US Treasuries. Again, if there's any sense of risk attending to the eurozone, you really cannot see it in this chart, can you?
No, German bund yields have been coming down. That's largely, though, on expectations of slow, sluggish growth across the eurozone and perhaps some anticipation of the European Central Bank embarking on quantitative easing at some stage.
Now, how can we explain, though, the width of the spread here? How have we managed to get to a point where the discount is that great?
The difference between the US Treasury yields,
Yes.
which are shown red, and the blue, which, as you can see, has widened quite a lot. That's obviously reflecting the very different sort of growth perspectives and also the central bank differences in central bank outlook. Although arguably, if you're the European Central Bank, you would suggest that maybe it'd be more helpful if US Treasury yields were a little bit higher, because the fact that US Treasury yields have been weakening of late has obviously had quite a dampening impact on the dollar, stronger euro, not helping all the deflationary forces in the eurozone, which are coming on top of the sluggish growth.
Okay, now that raises the topic of the euro. And if we take a look at how the euro, the currency, has been performing, an interesting sell-off in the last few days, possibly a reversion of the trend, but certainly too soon to say that with any confidence.
Well,
the main
ECB
thing
would love it to be a reversion of the trend, absolutely.
But for the time being, plainly, it remains remarkably strong compared to where it's been at different points.
Yeah, absolutely.
During the
I mean,
crisis.
this was the big headache for the European Central Bank. Not only you had sluggish growth, very low inflation, but an appreciating currency. So early this month, we had Mario Draghi, the ECB president, hinting, or very strongly, basically saying they're going to do something in June, lower interest rates, some kind of credit easing, and that's what's brought the euro down. The question is, if it hasn't changed the trend and we start getting the euro appreciating again, maybe because the spread between treasuries and bunds doesn't turn to their advantage, then that could create even more problems for the ECB.
So how is the ECB, do you think, going to deal with this? Plainly, they don't want to do QE, per se, purchases of government bonds, if they can possibly avoid it, or
Absolutely.
is that not true?
Well, yes, you could certainly imagine that the ECB might be thinking that they can sort of talk their way through this, if you like, because you could see the effect that Draghi's comments at the beginning of the month had had on the euro already. If we could go a little bit longer, have growth picking up, inflation, which is obviously what they're too low inflation is what they're worried about. If that could pick up, and we see a gradual back up in yields to in line with the improving economy, then the ECB will escape free.
But isn't there a risk that there's a limit to the power of the Draghi jawbone? I mean, 2 years ago he said it will be, we will do whatever it takes,
Absolutely.
and it worked.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, surely, he's going to have to back up his words.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the lesson from the well, you mentioned in your introduction the point about the rise of Euroscepticism and whether this makes economic integration harder, therefore makes the task of the European Central Bank trying to control all these economies harder. I'll just say that maybe actually the results in Southern Europe were not as bad in terms of they were more pro-reform than the results we got in France, and the UK. UK is not in the Eurozone, of course, but Germany as well, also victory for, or a strong result at least, for Angela Merkel's CDU there as well. So maybe that might help Draghi, but there are limits, of course.
Okay, Ralph, thank you very much indeed. It's not quite what one would have expected after an election result, but plainly the position does get ever more difficult for the ECB. So far they have navigated the crisis remarkably well. The next few months are going to be very challenging.